welcome to Rating the News. I'm your host, Vanessa Otero. My company, Adfontes Media, creates the famous media bias chart you may have seen pop up on your social media feeds. And the way we create that chart is by rating news and news-like sources for reliability and bias. And that's what the show is all about. Each week, we go through articles about a current topic and we rate them together and notice what makes them more or less reliable and more or less biased. Now, our team at Adfontes Media does this for hundreds of articles every single week. And I'm going to walk you through what they look for so you can get good at it too. And throughout this show, you'll hear me refer to our content analysis methodology and lots of different factors that we look for when rating the news. Today, I won't be training you in every aspect of our methodology. Rather, I'm going to spend time going through articles. But if you are interested in learning our methodology on your own, you can go to our website at adfontesmedia.com and you can sign up for one of our individual or school subscriptions. And we've got all the training info that you need there. As a customer, you can go through what I'm going to show you right now. This is our SUMA Starter, our news analysis training for beginners that teaches you just the intro to our methodology. There are some short videos that are only about 6 minutes long just to get you started, but then there's some PDFs walking you through the things that I'm going to walk you through today. There's downloads of the media bias chart. And then once you get a little bit more advanced, we have hour-long lessons as well. So we have our advanced news analysis training. And again, you can find that all on our site at adfontesmedia.com. So before we begin on this week's topic, just allow me to familiarize you with how our analyst teams rate the news. So every article that we rate, and again, we've done over 26,000 to date, is reviewed by 3 analysts in a pod at the same time, one center, one right, and one left, politically speaking. And they rate the articles on their own first. So let me just show you what that looks like. Okay. They have an interface with an article up at the top and several subfactors for reliability and several subfactors for bias. So the subfactors for reliability are expression, veracity, that's the fact-checking part of things, and the headline and graphic. Then they give it an overall reliability score. And then the bias subfactors are comparison, which includes things like topic selection and omission, political position, and language. So all these are factors of bias, and then there's an overall score. And then they give it an overall rating, put comments about bias and reliability. And then what they do is they look at each other's scores, they compare, they discuss, point out things that they see that maybe others might have missed. And if anybody needs to make changes, then they do, and then they move on. So today, this week's topic I'm really excited for. We're going to talk about Joe Biden's press conference. He had a really long press conference last week. It was about 2 hours long, and we're going to go over some articles. Now, the articles are from these news sources: People Magazine, CNN, the New York Post, and the New Republic. Okay. Now, one of these articles is, good comprehensive fact-based coverage. Another one is sort of silly and shallow. Another one has outright misleading and inaccurate information. And another one is pretty biased, but it's an analysis. So not terrible. Based on just the news sources, you can maybe guess which one would fall into which category. But again, you might be surprised. So let me go ahead and share the articles that we're going to go over. Again, I'm not going to talk about every single thing about our methodology in this particular session, just the highlights. Let's dive into this article. So this one, the title is President Biden Talks Gas Prices, Empty Shelves, School Closures, and More in Marathon Press Conference. And where is this article from? It is from People Magazine. Okay, so let's take a look at this headline. That seems pretty straightforward, that he talked about all of these things in a marathon, long press conference. Let's look at the lead. Joe Biden on Wednesday took questions from reporters, some tougher than others, for more than 2 hours at the White House on the eve of his administration's first anniversary. Seems, again, pretty factual so far, and not a lot of adjectives. This one piece says some tougher than others, but pretty straightforward so far. Now let's look at the graphic. We've got a picture of President Biden at the press conference. It's sort of what you would expect when that's what the topic is. Let's read a few paragraphs of this article and see what we notice about the reliability and bias of this particular piece. So President Joe Biden faced reporters Wednesday during a rare press conference that lasted 2 hours. So there's an adjective in here, rare, but that's a pretty accurate adjective. He hasn't had a lot of press conferences compared to other presidents. Standing at a podium in the East Room of the White House on the eve of the anniversary of his inauguration, Biden, 79, began by listing some of what he felt were his year-old administration's accomplishments. Again, lots of facts loaded in there, where he was, when, who, what he did, right? So that's all information that you'd want from news. Who, what, when, where. So what he felt were his accomplishments. And it's a characterization of what happened. Not really taking a position on what this People magazine, this article isn't really taking a position on whether those are actually accomplishments or just saying this. He felt that these were accomplishments, like 200 million Americans fully vaccinated against COVID-19, 6 million new jobs created, healthcare costs dropping, and more. And then he addressed the major obstacles, the combination of which are contributing to slumping approval from voters. And there's a citation there about Biden's approval rating as he enters the only other guaranteed year his party will remain in full control of the government. So this is a synthesis of what happened, but it's a pretty responsible synthesis. Like, what did he, they can't cover the whole 2-hour press conference, but if you want to communicate to somebody who didn't watch the press conference, this seems like a pretty fair summary that, first he talked about his accomplishments, then he addressed major obstacles, and then they go into some quotes. And there's actually quite a few quotes from President Biden's press conference in this article. Again, that's sort of important when the article is about the press conference. It's been a year of challenges, Biden said, but it's also been a year of enormous progress. Here's more of what the president said on a range of topics. So now we have a set of paragraphs. Let's just scroll through this really quickly to see what's in this article. Gas and grocery prices, okay? Going to school versus remote learning. Russia and Ukraine. President Biden and the conservative press. Okay. So there's sort of a lot here in each one of these sections. I mean, they said that he's going to talk about all these things. If that's what was in the title, and that's what you'd expect. So there's really quite a good bit of detail here. So here's a quote from the president about COVID-19 has created a lot of economic complications, Biden said. And then, that's a fact statement. He said this. There's no editorializing here. And then again, they go back to summarizing. Making sure prices don't become entrenched is a responsibility of the Federal Reserve, Biden said, pointing to the central banking system's missions to enable full employment while keeping prices stable. Notice the lack of adjectives here. They're not characterizing what Biden did. They're summarizing what he did. So it says inflation continues to rise faster than in decades as an array of consumers and employers speak out about the price crunch. Saying they speak out about the price crunch is a straightforward characterization, a pretty minimally balanced, minimally biased way to say. You could say are complaining, are railing against, are angry or frustrated, but they didn't characterize it that way. Okay. Washington's Republican minority, meanwhile, says the administration has failed to take it seriously. So they're introducing, they're saying that Biden says this, and, Republicans don't necessarily agree with his approach, right? Again, pretty fair, mild characterizations here. More quotes from Biden. Now, at this point, what we're seeing here is just really minimally balanced reporting. I mean, it's a ton of fact statements, and we don't have. Then the summaries are pretty. The summaries are accurate. They're concise, and they're not drawing further conclusions. Okay, his plan is threefold, he explained. Here's the first thing. And then, another quote here. The president claimed images of empty store shelves Americans may see on TV are misleading. Here's the second part of the plan about Build Back Better legislation. The third part of the plan is to promote competition. Okay, so here, if you were looking for just slight bias on like topic selection or omission, like what they're choosing to include versus not include, there is a lot of quotes directly from Biden. Again, this is important for an article that is about Biden's press conference, right? But sometimes there's different reasons for including quotes within an article, right? Sometimes you include a quote in an article to say, this is what somebody said. And sometimes you include the quote in the article for a different reason, which is to say the thing that this person said is true, and we want to give it a platform. Okay. So you want to balance out like what the article is doing, because if you think about the quote is sort of the guest of the article. It's the choice of the author to include quotes in here. Okay. But again, since the subject of this article is Biden said a bunch of things at the press conference, here's the stuff that he said, it's going to be sort of important to include this stuff. And so I think this selection of quotes leans more towards just saying, this is what he said versus like saying, here's an uninterrupted platform for Biden to spout his message, right? But just because it is so chock full of Biden statements, and challenges to it are sort of minimal, we could push that just a little bit left, not a lot, but just a little bit left. Okay. So where are we in terms of rating this? Okay. Let's take a look here at our sliders here. Okay. So there's a lot of high concentration of fact reporting here. Okay, so this is our category for fact reporting. It's expressed very factually. Nothing in here that raises our red flags about needing to question its veracity. So we're going to rate it high for veracity. You have it in this range. Headline and graphic are pretty straightforward, right? And we don't give it the highest scores because this isn't necessarily investigative or high effort reporting, but it's still quite good. And so far for bias, we're looking at, the fact that there's heavy quotes from Biden's press conference with minimal like challenge or other quotes. We'll just shade it a little over to the left. Again, not much for comparison. For political position, because it's framing Biden's words and like giving somewhat of a platform to Biden's words. We can ascribe some of Biden's political positions to this article, but again, not heavily so. It's not like this article is trying to say like, here's everything Biden said. We totally agree with it. And that's all you should listen to, because there's some other stuff in this article too, right? They talk about the challenges that he faced from the conservative press and the tough questions, right? So again, here's another paragraph about going to school and remote learning, really extensive quotes. Again, we see the same things, responsible, articulate summaries about, in-person learning in this paragraph. And then talking about Russia and Ukraine. So as Russia appears prepared for an invasion of its European neighbor, which may trigger a major crisis in the region, Biden warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin has never seen sanctions like the ones I promised will be imposed if he moves into Ukraine. So more quotes from the president, blandly stated. It just says, we've had very frank discussions. Vladimir Putin and I, the president said. No additional commentary. Biden offered another glimpse at his conversations with Putin. Just language that introduces other quotes without saying like, we agree or we disagree or anything like that. Okay. So, so far so good. This is like pretty good in-depth coverage from People magazine about the press conference. If you wanted to know, like if you didn't watch the press conference and you wanted to know what happened at it, and you read this article, you would be pretty well informed about it. All right. President Biden and the conservative press. Biden, who has held fewer press conferences in his first year in office than 3 previous presidents, fact statement, fair, seemed pleased. Okay, that's a characterization, but it's pretty mild and fair characterization to be taking questions from reporters on Wednesday and even called on some correspondents from more adversarial outlets. How many hours am I doing this? I'm happy to stick around, he said at one point well into the 2-hour event. Fox News' White House correspondent Peter Doocy was out of his seat at this point, hand raised, hoping to be called on. Is it poking a little fun at Peter Doocy? Maybe not. I mean, maybe could read a little bias into there. Just again, very slight. You always ask the nicest question, Biden said, acknowledging the fiery reporter who often goes head to head with Biden's press secretary Jen Psaki in the White House briefing room. So they did call that out. Okay. All right, I got a whole binder full, Doocy replied. I know you do. None of them make a lot of sense to me, Biden said with a smile. Fire away. They introduced the exchange as it happened. Why are you trying so hard in your first year to pull the country so far to the left? Doocy said. Well, I'm not, the president answered. And they, again, extensively quote what Biden said. Then there's another question from Newsmax. So later, Newsmax's James Rosen had a chance to ask a question in one of the more unusual moments of the 2 hours. Now, they characterize it as unusual, but again, that's fairly mild, given the things that you could say about this interaction. So he says, thank you very much for this honor, Rosen began. I'd like to raise a delicate subject with the utmost respect for your life accomplishments and the high office you hold. Okay, this is what he started out with. Then he asked the president about a poll suggesting that some voters question whether Biden is, quote, mentally fit. And Biden says, well, I'll let you make the judgment whether they're correct. Thank you. But Rosen wasn't done. The question I have for you, sir, if you'd let me finish, is why do you suppose such large segments of the American electorate have come to harbor such profound concerns about your cognitive fitness? Thank you. Before moving on to finish the presser, he replied, I have no idea. Okay. So this is a thing that happened at the press conference, and other people, made some news about this because this is like, an unusual interaction, certainly. Saying, why is the press, are you cognitively fit? And they just end it without any commentary. This is news, right? So this is, I think this is a pretty good article. As far as reliability, we've got it up here, just a little shade over to the left, just because the surfacing of so many quotes from Biden without challenge. But then again, you've got some balance because it surfaces the quotes from the conservative reporters without challenge, just trying to tell what's going on. I mean, this is a pretty middle, just like maybe tiny skews right. Even if you found no bias with this article, I think that'd be pretty fair. Also, our analysts are usually within 3 points of each other on average, but if we're within like 8 points of each other either way, that's pretty good. So there's our first article, which is the People magazine. Good news, right? Okay, let's move on to a different article. I'm going to go back to my dashboard here, and it's called Biden Finally Lets Loose in All His Messy Glory. Okay, messy glory. Interesting. Let's take a look at this article, which is from the New Republic. Okay, if you might not be familiar with the New Republic, but maybe you are. So let's try to identify the reliability and bias of this article. So Biden finally lets loose in all his messy glory. Okay, so there's more to unpack here already, because you've got characterizations of how Biden was, rather than just saying like, here's what he talked about, right? Saying that he lets loose. Lets loose is like, has generally positive connotations. Like, he's been, kind of shackled, and like now he's free to operate. And then saying in all his messy glory, right? So messy is not necessarily a compliment, right? Maybe it's an allusion to characterizations that he talks too much, or that he just speaks really off the cuff. But then they say glory, right? Like, this is a good thing. Like, taken together, he's doing all right. Like, we kind of like this press conference. So and then what does the lead say? It says largely confined to the White House due to COVID and kept away from the press by an overprotective staff, the president broke free for almost 2 hours on Wednesday. Again, this theme that he's been constrained and he gets to like be himself, and that's a good thing. That's what is conveyed by this statement. So it's a summary, but there's adjectives in this summary, like overprotective staff, characterizing his previous being buttoned up previously to being confined, and comparing that to him breaking free. And then you've got a more relaxed picture of Joe Biden, like he's just going to do what he's going to do. Images tell you a lot. All right. So let's read a few of these paragraphs. For a year, the White House communication staff has shrouded Joe Biden in bubble wrap, apparently fearful that if left to his own devices, the 79-year-old president would prove too garrulous and too off message. So it's a bit critical of the staff, right? They kept him in bubble wrap. Like that doesn't seem to be like complimentary to the staff, saying that they're apparently fearful. This is a characterization of the situation, right? A fact about the situation is that he has had fewer press conferences than his predecessors. But a characterization of that situation is that the staff is really responsible for this. They're apparently fearful that he talks too much, right? You could find evidence for that, but there's a story, like there's a narrative here already. Not necessarily unfair. I mean, there are certainly facts to support this, but it says not only has Biden held far fewer press conferences than any predecessor since Ronald Reagan, but the president's handlers also shielded him from almost all interviews with knowledgeable print reporters. But on his 364th day in office, we got 112 minutes of pure, unplugged Joe Biden, filled with shrewd observations, occasional regrets, apologies for talking too much, and much more candor than is normal from a sitting president. All right, so adjectives. We've already got a lot of adjectives in this article compared to the previous one, right? And this is already like more favorable to Joe Biden without even getting into the facts of the press conference, right? Like we like Joe. This had shrewd observations. Again, that's not an unfair, statement, but it's favorable, right? Occasional regrets, apologies for talking too much. Yet, even though these are not necessarily positive, they're not necessarily negative either. And more candor, right? Candor is usually viewed positively. More candor that is normal from a sitting president. I mean, arguably, Trump's claim to, connection with folks was that he was very full of candor, right? So maybe Joe Biden is more full of candor than previous presidents, but probably not more than Trump, some would argue, right? Yes, there were moments that during Wednesday's press conference that probably made his aides backstage wince, especially on the volatile issue of Ukraine. But Biden also displayed a mastery of the realities of power and previewed probably will be the Democrats' strongest argument in December. So mastery is a characterization, previewed probably as the strongest argument. Okay. And then the next paragraph is about, news he made in the press conference. So the initial post-presser headlines zeroed in, and there's a link to the New York Times here, on Biden's comments on Ukraine, which some pundits may consign to the dread category of gaffes. So here, I mean, the assumption is that this writer is not consigning those to gaffes, right? He's being like forgiving about whatever Biden said. He said, reflecting on the foreign policy consensus about Vladimir Putin's intentions, Biden said, "My guess is he will move in. He has to do something." That assessment almost certainly was more honest than whatever vague language was suggested in the president's briefing books. Again, blaming favoring him being honest and free and garrulous to the confines of whatever his handlers were talking about. Okay, so Biden also undoubtedly caused consternation among his national security staff when he seemed to put a minor incursion by Russia into Ukraine into a different and lesser category than a full-scale invasion. But Biden seemingly backtracked later in the press conference when he suggested that by minor incursion, he meant things like cyber attacks. And just to be safe, on the safe side, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, immediately issued a statement saying, if any Russian military forces move across the Ukrainian border, that's a renewed invasion. Okay, so he talks about this minor incursion thing that did get a lot of press in other news articles. So it says the hand wringing over Biden's imprecise language on Ukraine harks back to the controversy surrounding the very first live televised presidential press conference. 61 years ago, as John Kennedy faced reporters and made TV history, he was asked about apprehension about the instantaneous broadcast of presidential press conferences because an inadvertent statement would no longer be correctable. JFK rightly waved off these concerns, stressing that the possible need for clarification was more than outweighed by the advantage of providing more direct communication. Now, this is interesting. So all we've had here so far is all we know about this news conference was that he talked a lot. It was long, but he was free and displayed a mastery. And he said some things about Ukraine that maybe ruffled some feathers. But then the comparison here is really favorable to JFK. That of all the things that you could compare Joe Biden to, reaching back to the 60s or 61 years ago, to say that this is like when John Kennedy did it. That's pretty favorable, right? So again, you can see the left-leaning bias in here and the favorability. And what is this article in terms of reliability? So far, all the facts, underlying facts that he said. He talked about minor incursion. Jen Psaki immediately issued a statement. These are all facts, right? This is fact-based. There's nothing in here that causes to question the veracity, but it's more of an analysis, right? It's more of a summary, a characterization of what happened and why it was important and where it fits into the broad scheme of things, rather than just like, what are all the things that happened at the press conference? So this is a take on the press conference. This is a take on how Joe Biden was in his press conference, right? So it goes into, if Ukraine was a dominant news story Wednesday, Biden's comments on the Republicans in 2020 offer larger political implications. So here he talks about like the political implications and what Biden said. He picks out, what are the Republicans for? What are they for? Name me one thing they're for. In his opening remarks, a well-briefed Biden, again, characterization, favorable, fair, but like favorable. Biden quoted from Chris Sununu, New Hampshire's popular Republican governor, who recently explained to the Washington Examiner why he had passed up a potentially winnable Senate race. After talking with some Senate Republicans, Sununu concluded they were all, for the most part, content with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It was very clear that we just have to hold the line for 2 years. Okay, so I'm just going to be a roadblock for the next 2 years. That's not what I do. And in another effective line, Biden asked rhetorically, did you ever think that one man out of office could intimidate an entire party where they've been unwilling to take any vote contrary to what he thinks should be taken for being fear of being defeated in the primary? So again, we're talking about, first it was about Ukraine and what he said. Here, there's the commentary about the state of Republicans versus Democrats in the upcoming in the upcoming elections. And then, and that's pretty much the end of the article. There's some stuff about off-year elections and campaigning, the difference between him and Obama campaigning, and the conclusion is there's a rhythm to presidential news conferences that transcends the individual in the White House. Rereading the transcript of Kennedy's first news conference, I was stunned with the continuities of today. So again, it's nothing inaccurate in here at all. Favorable towards Biden, but what are a lot of these sentences? A lot of these are characterizations, interpretations of what this means, like what it means now, what it means in the future, and that's largely analysis. Like analysis is when you take some facts and you use them to support an argument, well, right? So there are plenty of facts in here. Again, there's nothing that stands out is us needing to question the veracity of it. So where would we rate this? So over to the left, like pretty favorable, like political position wise, like fairly pro Biden, right? So things that are, sort of Democratic mainstream, like views that, that like mainstream Democrats would hold, like office holding Democrats would hold. We put them just in this middle of the left category. Okay, the language is not super like overt. It's not super strong, but it still definitely skews left. So let's put that in the middle of the skews left category. In comparison to like the People magazine article, certainly this is more left. So we put it over here in this left skewing category, like not quite to the hyper partisan left, but that's where we've got it. And then this is analysis. This is an analysis article. So like it's a mix of this category is for expression, it's analysis, veracity, true. There's lots of things that are true in there, but there are things that could be on a scale of like 1 to 5 for how true things in the statements here are like 1s and 2s. Headline and graphic, again, it's the headline and graphic itself are analysis related. And then, so we put this right in this mix of fact reporting and analysis category. So right about there. All right. Okay. So we've had a good thorough fact reporting article from People magazine. We've had a left-leaning analysis article from the New Republic. And what do we have next? Let's take a look at Biden's press conference was an utter disaster. Okay, well, that's different from what we've seen. Who wrote this article? The New York Post. Okay. Imagine if all you read was 2 headlines. Biden lets loose in all of his messy glory in the previous one, and Biden's press conference was an utter disaster from this one. You have really different views already of like how Biden's press conference actually was, especially if you didn't see it, right? This is, again, a 2-hour press conference. So you can actually go and look up the transcripts of it. And we'll do that here in a second. All right. And we'll talk about how you do that and why. Okay. So this is labeled as an opinion editorial. All right. By the Post editorial board. And clearly the headline is an opinion. Okay. So at the most, like that's kind of the starting point in our rating system. Like there's a category for opinion. So, it's a good clue that it's going to, start there. But we don't necessarily want to just take the article's word for it that it is an opinion. We want to read it and make our own characterizations of it. Okay. Sometimes, the way that newspapers categorize things as opinion really varies from news source to news source. Like it's really different in like the New York Times and Wall Street Journal versus like the New York Post, and worse reliability news sources. Okay, so if President Biden's press conference Wednesday was supposed to inspire confidence, it failed horribly. All right, so it failed horribly is a pretty strong opinionated characterization. Okay, so even though he spent most of it clearly calling on reporters from a list of safe questioners provided by his staff, he stumbled and bumbled and too often made no sense at all. Okay. Plus, he repeated his bizarre whisper shout gimmick to emphasize certain points. What it actually emphasizes is age. That's pretty harsh, right? Neither of the 2 articles mentioned anything about like a whisper shout or said that he stumbled and bumbled. So clearly these are like at least right-leaning characterizations, like sort of anti-Biden characterizations, calling him old and, and making fun of like how he talks. You saying that it's just not clear, right? Stumbled and bumbled is a pretty, stark way to describe how he talks. On that note, he kept walking down memory lane, reminiscing about how in my day, cable news was like that, the Republican Party was like this, and so on. he's fighting old wars in his head, or maybe he is just confused about the modern world. So what's the difference between analysis and opinion? And why is this why are these opinion statements? Okay, these are opinion statements because, as I said, analysis is more like you have some facts and then you make some inferences and conclusions and statements of meaning about it. So like facts, conclusions, facts, conclusions. Here you just have conclusions, right? He doesn't say like, here's what Biden said, and therefore we're drawing this conclusion. They're just saying like, here's a summary and here's how we're going to characterize it for you. On that note, he kept walking down memory lane, reminiscing about how in my day, cable news was like that. The Republican Party was like this and so on. There's really no specifics to what they're referring to. Okay. So he said, yet he couldn't remember what he said last week, insisting he had compared opponents of end running the Senate filibuster rules to pass the nationalized election law bill to Bull Connor and Jefferson Davis. Okay. So this is a really interesting line here. It's an interesting claim. It says, yet he couldn't remember what he said last week. He couldn't remember what he said last week. That's something I want to check. That like makes me that makes me put up my like my BS detectors, because I didn't read anything about that in the other articles, even like the more straightforward article. Okay, now it's a good practice when there's let's look at the rest of this article. Okay. So first of all, you can actually see that this was the cover page on the New York Post. And it says, he said, what? Now we know why they keep him hidden. Biden's confused, disastrous Q&A. Dear Joe, on your 1-year anniversary, I want a divorce. Piers Morgan Uncensored. Like, that's really a lot of, attacking and negative characterization of Joe Biden about his press conference. And since it's a very short, opinionated article about a really long press conference, it makes me want to make sure that like they're actually representing what he said accurately. Now, when it's a short article, and I have like my BS detectors up about it, I go and Google the transcript. Okay, so if you go and Google the transcript, so here's how you do it. So transcript Joe Biden press conference. Okay, you just Google that. You find a couple of reliable transcripts. This first one is from the White House. If you don't want to believe the White House, then you can go to rev.com, which is a transcription service, third party, that has basically the same thing. But so remarks by by President Biden in the press conference. So I want to check, like, did he forget what he said last week? Because the themes here are like, he's old, he's bumbling and stumbling. No wonder his handlers keep him hidden. And like they are asserting that he just forgot because he's, I don't know, senile, that he said this last week. So what we want to do with this is a super long, this 2-hour press conference, right? Are we going to read this whole thing? No. What we want to do is we want to search it, right? Transcripts are searchable. So a little trick: Control F on a PC, Command F on a Mac. So they talk about, what does this quote say? It says, all right, compared to Bull Connor and Jefferson Davis. Yet minutes later, he warned those same Democratic senators that their supposedly infamous position will stick with them for the rest of the days. Said, yet he couldn't remember what he said last week. All right, let's find the part in the transcript that it says. So let's look up Bull Connor. Okay, here it is. Okay. So somebody asked him a question about, said, people heard the speech that you gave on voting rights in Georgia recently, in which you described those who are opposed to you to George Wallace and Jefferson Davis, and some people took exception to that. What do you say to those who are offended by your speech? And is this country more unified than it was when you first took office? He said, number one, anybody who listened to that speech, I did not say there were going to be a George Wallace or a Bull Connor. I said that we're going to have a decision in history that is going to be marked just like it was then. You either voted on the side that that didn't make you a George Wallace or didn't make you a Bull Connor. But if you did not vote for the Voting Rights Act back then, you were voting with those who agreed with Connor, those who agreed with, et cetera. So there's more statements about Bull Connor. So he said, I know you dispute the characterization that you called folks who would oppose those voting bills as being Bull Connor or George Wallace, but you said that they would be in sort of the same camp. He said, no, I didn't say that. Look at what I said. Go back and read what I said and tell me if you think I called anyone who voted on the side of the position taken by Bull Connor that they were a Bull Connor. He says, by the way, no one forgets who was on the side of the king or versus on Bull Connor. The history books will note it, right? So there's this dispute about like what he meant when he was talking about how people would remember voters, right? It's not like he forgot. Like there's like suggesting that he forgot is quite misleading, right? So let's take that sentence and put it in this misleading category, and then let's look at some other statements in here. Okay, it says then there was his confession, quote confession, at the end that he forgot he's president, not a senator, as implicit explanation for his disastrous first year. Okay, I want to check this because it has confession and forgot in quotes. Okay, and when there's quotes about a press conference, like there are other quotes in this there are other quotes in this article directly verbatim from the transcript, right? Like the cost of going into Ukraine in terms of physical loss of life for the Russians. Like this is a direct quote from the transcript. So these other quotes they insinuate that these are direct quotations, that he forgot that he's president, not a senator, Says, but earlier he insisted he's done more than any other president in history. What the fudge? Okay, so first of all, saying what the fudge is not better than saying like what the actual F word, right? And I know it's an opinion article, but that's pretty colloquial. It's pretty colloquial for a newspaper. So let's look. Did he say that he forgot that he's president, not a senator? Let's look that up. Okay, did he say forgot? Okay, there's no forgot. Maybe it's forget. Forget. Did he forget? Okay, I forget which cabinet member. No, that's not the reference. No one forgets who was on the side of king. Okay, so the word forgot is not on here. So there's no, like, that's definitely not a quote, and it's pulled out as if it is a quote. But did he forget that he's a senator or a president, not a senator? Let's look up senator, okay? Because you must have mentioned senator somewhere, and that's at the end, right? So Senator Manchin, okay, that's not it. Senators and congressmen, that's not it. Okay, this doesn't seem, okay, oh, here at the end. So it says, and this is at the end of the conference, right? So that must be what they're referring to. And one of the things that I do think that has been made clear to me, speaking of polling, is the public doesn't want me to be the president senator. They want me to be the president and let the senators be senators. Okay, now compared to this, that's what he said. This is how they characterize it. Then there was his confession at the end that he forgot he's president, not a senator. This is inaccurate. Like, he did not say this. Right. At the most favorable interpretation is that this is extremely misleading. OK, so this is already dropped. We've got two misleading statements. We're dropping this down in reliability so far, and the bias over it's pretty far right. Right. OK, so his answers on Ukraine were particularly confused. So this goes, they're trying to support a theme that, like, he's confused. It was disastrous. He forgets stuff. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It says the issue is pretty straightforward. Vladimir Putin is threatening an invasion and will do it if he thinks he can get away with it. At the least, he'll try to get the West to bribe him by promising him much of what he wants without any fighting. Biden seemed to offer one bribe by volunteering that NATO won't make Ukraine a member anytime soon. Okay, a bribe, that's a particular that's a pretty harsh characterization of what he actually said in the transcript. That's another thing that we can review. But at this point, like, I'll just tell you that it's misleading compared to the transcript. Here's another one. Worse, at one point, the president suggested Putin has no choice but to invade because he's boxed himself in. At least that's what we think. That's what Biden said, but his syntax made it impossible to say for sure. Okay. So again, another quote, has no choice. Did Biden suggest that Putin has no choice to invade? we can find that out. All right. No choice. Okay, that doesn't exist in here. How about just choice? Okay, the word choice is in here. All right. Choice is about a growing economy. That's not it. Okay. Okay. So here's what Biden said about choices. In addition to that, Putin has, he has a stark choice. He either de-escalation or diplomacy, confrontation or the consequences. So the other thing he says about choices is you bite off your nose to spite your face. It's not like they have all these wonderful choices out here. So he actually says the opposite of he says the opposite of what the Post article says. It says he suggested Putin has no choice, but what he actually said was that Putin faces a stark choice. All right. So in putting it in quotes makes you think that they're actual quotes. This is inaccurate. Like this is just not an accurate quote. So this is a pretty short article. We've got, there's other issues with the rest of these either. It ends with, what a disaster. No wonder his staff does everything it can to keep him away from the press. All right. So based on having like at least 3 misleading statements and at least 1 inaccurate statement in here, and having it be so just generally anti-Biden and characterizing his speech as stumbling and bumbling, forgetful, disastrous, again, really harsh language, anti-Biden, like more so than others, like even within his own party, talking like even, Mitch McConnell, had, positive things to say about Joe Biden's direction on Ukraine, right? So we're putting this hyper-partisan right. So let's put it about over here. But for veracity, for expression, it's a low-ranking opinion. Headline and graphic is also very opinionated, but the veracity score is really what brings it down, because you've got some inaccurate information in here. So we judge this one pretty harshly. It's down here in the contains inaccurate fabricated info category. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at our last article, which is from CNN. All right. So it says Biden's "I don't believe polls" is the worst answer from his press conference. Okay. So CNN, large news organization, and there are sort of 2 titles that show up. There's one that shows up when you link to it, and then there's if you link to it on social media, it would say, Biden's "I don't believe in polls" is the worst answer from his press conference. But this article here, it says this is the worst answer Joe Biden gave at his press conference. All right, so it's a take on something that happened at the press conference, and it's sort of clickbaity. It's like, well, what was it? Like, what did he say? So already with a headline, I'm like, all right, this is clickbait. Headline is one of those things where sometimes that's all people read, and so we weight it fairly heavily. All right, so it was one of Joe Biden's shortest answers in his nearly 2-hour press conference on Wednesday. It was also the worst. Okay, what was so bad? Like, we heard about this like minor incursion thing that got a lot of news. Even the New York Post was like, that seems, they didn't like that. It says he was asked, how do you plan to win back moderates and independents who cast a ballot for you in 2020, but polls indicate aren't happy with the way you're doing your job now? The president responded this way: I don't believe the polls. Okay, well, did he say that? We can check it, right? Spoiler alert, he did. The polls. Okay, he said, so how do you plan to win back moderates and independents who cast a ballot for you in 2020, but polls indicate aren't happy with the way you're doing your job now? The president said, I don't believe the polls. And then he just moves on to something else. So in the other 3 news articles, like none of them have mentioned this, right? But for some reason, this CNN author is focusing on like this was the worst answer, like of all of his answers. All right, let's dig into why. So he says, what? All right. So we already get the sense that this is an opinion article, right? It's an opinion, and it's a take on something Joe Biden said, like a piece of the press conference. So there's going to be some argument around why this is the worst answer. So it says, if you heard echoes of former President Donald Trump in the answer, you're not alone. Oh, it's really interesting. Drawing a comparison to President Donald Trump. So essentially, and what are the next two lines? It says, it's stuff Trump said. If it's bad, I say it's fake. Trump said last year. If it's good, I say that's the most accurate poll ever. So what does this insinuate to put this these two sentences here? Joe Biden says, I don't believe the polls. And the author says, what? Then the author says, if that reminds you of Donald Trump, you're not alone. Okay, so Joe Biden is like Donald Trump because of this answer. And here's support for that. If it's bad, I say it's fake. Trump said last year. Interestingly, this article, links to another article by this same author. And then it says, and back in 2018, Trump told a crowd about the news more broadly. Don't believe the crap you're seeing from these people. The fake news, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening. Okay. So there's another link to, an article about Donald Trump saying that, like, you shouldn't believe what you see, shouldn't believe what you hear. And the fact that these two sentences are here after, Joe Biden saying, Joe Biden's worst answer is, I don't believe the polls, is drawing a comparison between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And it's also like taking the subject of this press conference and using it as an excuse to say, and by the way, Donald Trump is terrible, right? Like, where did that come from? So, this is, it's attacking Joe Biden, but it's sort of attacking Joe Biden for being bad, like Donald Trump is bad. So this is a pretty left biased article already, like against Joe Biden and against Donald Trump, which really Donald Trump didn't have anything to do with the press conference. He didn't even have to bring this up. But for some reason, this author is like fixated on this, I don't believe the polls thing. Okay. But then he goes back and says, that's not to equate what Biden did on Wednesday with the 4 years of misleading and outright lying Trump did as president. They're not the same. Okay. So he's saying, well, he is like Donald Trump. Actually, he's not like Donald Trump. It's not the same. And he says, and he provides like some context and reasoning for why Joe Biden might have said this, right? It says, and my guess is that Biden was simply being glib in his response to a question about the polls. In fact, Biden referenced polling again in the same press conference. So, every president, not necessarily in the first 12 months, but every president in the first couple of years, almost every president, of the last presidents, at least 4 of them have had polling numbers in the 44% favorable, right? That he said at one point, right? So there's context for why Joe Biden might have said, "I don't believe the polls," right? It's not like he's saying he doesn't believe any polls ever. He's just like putting it in context of like, okay, approval polls at this point in the presidency. He's not going to take that to mean that like everyone hates him. So hence the short line. So. The author is, giving that context, which context itself refutes his original point. Like, this is a terrible answer by Joe Biden. So he says, Joe Biden doesn't believe in polling. That's just like Donald Trump, who didn't believe in polling, but actually Joe Biden does believe in polling. It says over here. So Joe Biden believes in polling. So it's not a great argument so far. It contradicts itself. Okay. This was a throwaway line aimed at dismissing a question he didn't want to answer. Why are independents so unhappy with the job you're doing? But the context matters here. Biden came to office. So here's the argument that the author is making. Biden came to office amid an ongoing onslaught of truth and facts by Trump. Little awkward phrasing here. It's not exactly accurate. It's not an onslaught of truth and facts by Trump. That would imply that he had an onslaught of truth and facts. I think he meant an onslaught against truth and facts by Trump, right? So about the 2020 election and just about everything else. given that he doesn't have the luxury of being glib or dismissive of polling. So his issue is that like Biden shouldn't be glib or dismissive of polling because Trump created this crisis of trust, and he goes along to, like, this is basically the whole argument, because Trump lied and was bad. Saying something like that you don't believe in polls is bad. Okay, like that's something that you could argue about. There's contradictions within this article that make it not a very strong argument, not a really great opinion. But the thing that bothers me the most about it is like, this is a CNN, this is a major news organization. If this is all you read about the press conference, you literally know nothing about what happened in the press conference. This is some take. It's a clickbaity take, and it's shallow. And it's not the point of the press conference, and it doesn't really inform you very well, right? And it's super biased. It's biased against Trump. Just like brings in like a bunch of things that were like not relevant to the press conference, and it's biased against Biden, saying at the end here, being president, especially after the 4-year rolling crisis of Trump, isn't about doing the easy thing. It's about doing the right thing. And this answer, at least, Biden didn't do that, and it just seems like really selective, and about like of all the things that you could talk about in the press conference, like focusing on this just seems like incomplete at best. Okay, so we've got so where do we put this? It's nothing in here is untrue, but it's certainly an opinion. It's a left-leaning opinion, and the shallowness and the fact that it's just it's incomplete. Our analysts rated just a little bit below this 24 line, which is this category is selective or incomplete, unfair persuasion category. So things that are problematic tend to go in this category, right? The differences between things that are opinion up here and things that are incomplete, often a clickbaity headline, like a problematic headline, will be enough to drop it down below 24 in our rating system. Okay. Now we have a couple of other articles that we rated. I'll just show you the titles, right? From The Nation, which is left-leaning. Biden asks the best question: what are Republicans for? And this is a left-leaning opinion. And this is from The Federalist. It says, Joe Biden says he is ready to help you understand how great things are. And this is a right-leaning opinion. So if you want to take a look at our overall topic scores, how our analysts rated these, you can see them at our topic of the week. And you can see the People magazine, most reliable, just a little bit to the left, right? Our New York Post article down here, our New Republic articles over here, the CNN one is over here, and then the Nation and the Federalist, which we didn't go over today, over to the left for opinion, and the right for opinion. Now, just reflect on like what it would be like if all you read was just one of these articles. You just have a very incomplete, unless you read the People magazine article, you'd have a very incomplete view, and you might walk away thinking like this truly was messy glory, or this truly was an utter disaster. And you might believe some false things about it, right? So it's super important to get the whole universe of information. All right. So that's it for this week. Just as a quick reminder, we do this every single week about the topics. Our analysts rate these and a handful of articles related to this topic, and then we have a different topic called starter, our starter topic, and the story there is the hashtag Bare Shelves Biden, and how social media users post pictures of bare shelves and blame that on President Biden. So if you want to check out those articles and their scores, you can do so at our website at the topic of the week section. And we do choose 2 different topics every week. Again, if you want to learn more about our methodology in depth, just go to sign up for our individual or school memberships. And those include our full set of training videos on content analysis. And if you want to follow along as we go through these stories each week, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we can rate the news together. See you next time.